Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Today, I wanted to unbox and give my initial impressions of Hellboy the board game from Mantic Games. This game has been around for a few years now and it has gradually drifted off of my radar, but a current Kickstarter for expansions has brought it back to the forefront of my mind. And after a brief search around, I found a copy of the game on Amazon for £35, and for me, that's a really good buy-in point. It has a single campaign covering 6 missions, and just over 30 miniatures, so it's quite compact. And at £35, that's an easy buy-in for me to test the game out. To be honest, when the game first came out, I was a little bit 50-50 on it. On the plus side, the designer is James Hewitt of Mantic Games, and James Hewitt has produced some of my favourite games ever. He worked on Silver Tower, he worked on Gore Chosen, he worked on Betrayal at Calth, Blood Bowl. So obviously his involvement made me immediately interested. However, the game went to Kickstarter and I don't back games on Kickstarter. Furthermore, I'm not in love with the Hellboy franchise. I love the artwork of Mike Mignola, but I've never read the comics. I have of course seen all of the films and I love 2 of them. Can you guess which 2? But that IP alone wasn't enough to draw me in. The recent Kickstarter brought this back to the forefront of my mind, so here we are. The game is produced by Mantic, and I have had mixed experiences with them in the past. I did not like their Walking Dead game. I thought it was incredibly clever, but it just wasn't for me. But I very much enjoy their Dungeon Saga game. But I think that's enough about that. Let's take a look inside the box. Before we look at individual components, I did just want to point out that under the Punchboards you have these plastic trays which hold all of the miniatures for the game, as well as the dice, and underneath this first tray there is another plastic tray for cards and tokens and the like. And this is good. This is a really nice setup for the game. I particularly like these storage compartments for the miniatures, because sometimes when you get them in these storage trays like this, the trays really grip the miniatures very, very tightly indeed. And if you're going to paint your miniatures, there's a chance that when you push them back into those trays, you're going to chip paint or take paint off. But these, they hold the miniatures in place, but you can see miniatures just pop in and out nice and easily. That's a bonus for me. First of all, we'll do a quick run through of the miniatures. There are 25 in total. You get 4 agents. Of course, you get Big Red himself, Hellboy. Very nicely detailed miniatures. They are firm plastic. They aren't really bendy and flexible. They are reminiscent of the Walking Dead miniatures, but I would say possibly more detailed. They are of course all in grey, but the agents do have clippy bases. These can be removed, so you can give each of your heroes a designated colour. We have Liz, blasting enemies with fire. Johan, in his containment suit. And of course the wonderful Abe Sapien, with his pistol and harpoon. The campaign in this base set sees you facing off against frog people, and all of the minions are tied to that particular theme. You get 3 of these armed frog people, nicely detailed, and should be really, really quick to paint up. You get 3 of these. I believe these are the venomous frog people that will spit at you. And then you get 3 of these. These are the transforming frog people. They are mid-transformation and look suitably creepy. And then you get 3 of these tough guy brawler frog people that look suitably intimidating. As you can see, you could use the same painting technique on all of these. You get 6 stands of these frog swarms, and these are not enemies in the traditional sense, but they will swarm around the board and they will make it more difficult for you to achieve your objectives, and they will also make the doom tracker increase at a rapid pace. And then you get 3 boss miniatures, which I believe represent 4 different types of boss. This is Rasputin, and you will face him as both a ghost and in his reincarnated form. Then there is the huge frog beast, the frog monster, which is a suitably intimidating foe. When you get the bases this size, sometimes they bend, and this one was all bent up in the box, but a little bit of hot water and that's straightened out quite nicely. And finally, you get this awesome tentacled Gribbly. This is really nice model. I like this a lot. I will probably use this in a bunch of different games. Next up we have the dice, and I really like the dice mechanism in this game. There are 4 different coloured dice that you will roll throughout the game. Yellow is the weakest, orange is the next strongest, red is normally the strongest that you will ever roll, although occasionally you can upgrade the red dice to the black dice. I will say the black dice are a bad design. The thin red crosses on a black background are incredibly difficult for me to read. But other than that, this is a really interesting dice system because throughout the game you will be asked to take different tests, and the test will specify what colour dice you roll. You will normally roll 3 dice of that colour. And really you're just rolling the dice and adding up the pips to see how successful you are. But there are a few things that make it more interesting. One is your dice can be upgraded or downgraded. You can spend extra actions when you do something to boost one of your dice up by 1 colour band. So if you're normally rolling yellow dice, you could spend an extra action to boost one of your yellow dice up to an orange dice, for example. But also there will be things that will cause your dice to be downgraded as well. For example, having extra enemies in your space when you're fighting. So it's a really lovely system of representing how you can get better chances of completing an action because you're focusing more on it, or because you have an ally in your space who has decided to help you, or conversely it becomes more difficult to do something because you're trying to fight an enemy but there are lots of other enemies distracting you, so it becomes harder to achieve your goals. The other thing that makes this dice system interesting is you get to roll the special blue dice every time you take an action as well. And each side of the blue dice is different. 2 of the sides will add extra successes to your roll. 1 is a reroll symbol that will allow you to reroll any of the other dice you rolled. 1 is a double symbol that will allow you to double the highest score you rolled. 1 is the special BPRD symbol, which is a wild card which you can use for any other result on the blue dice, or to activate one of your character's special abilities. And then finally there is a skull side, which is a catastrophe side, and when you roll that, you have to discard your highest scoring dice, and also sometimes other bad things will happen. For example, if you're firing a gun, your gun will run out of ammo. So this is a very dice heavy game. I do like dice, I enjoy rolling dice, but I feel that within that dice rolling there are ways that you can mitigate the odds, there are ways that you can take advantage of having help from your friends, positioning yourself carefully to make sure that you're not getting downgraded on too many of your dice. And then there is also still that element that at some point you might roll a catastrophe and your best laid plans are completely ruined. And I think that that occasional blip in your plans is an important part of any solo or co-op game. You're not fighting against an opponent who can make clever decisions and try to outwit you, so occasionally you need a little bit of bad luck to make you go, oh, well now I have to do something different, now my plans have changed. Of course you get your rulebook, it's 32 pages long, but it seems to be quite comprehensive. When I read through it, nothing immediately sprang out as something that needed more clarification, but as I was reading through it, I did notice there are a few little rules that may be difficult to remember in play and may not be as easy to find flicking through the rulebook during a game as they should be. In particular, things like there are rules for when you move out of a room that contains enemies. You have a choice of either taking the enemies with you, fighting them off and taking damage to leave them in the space you're on, and then there's a chance for allies that are in your space to spend cubes to distract other enemies. And I think things like that, when you're in the middle of a game, you might forget. And I didn't notice anything in the rulebook that clearly laid out all those different options so that you could quickly check your choices in-game. You also get a really good tutorial booklet, and I think that once you've read through that, you pretty much know how to play. Most of the game is covered in that tutorial. I thought it was incredibly well done. This isn't the most complicated game in the world. It's pretty straightforward, it's quite streamlined. I think James Hewitt does a good job of making games that have rule sets that mean you can focus on the actual gameplay. You end up playing the game and not the rules. You can absorb yourself more in the theme and in the decisions that actually make the fun of the game. I have been known in the past to skip tutorial sections of games, but I really thought this was a good tutorial. Next up you get 4 hero cards, one for each of the agents. This is a solo or co-op game playing against an AI, and to the best of my understanding you will always use 4 agents. That means that out of the box you don't really get any decisions on how to build your team. You will always have to take these 4 characters, but you do get to pick additional items for them, and there are also backup agents which aren't like full characters, but they're additional allies that can turn up to assist you. And looking at these character cards and also some of the other elements of the game, this really does feel like Silver Tower to me. It's not the same game, there are many differences between them, but it almost feels like Silver Tower is a small sliver at the heart of Hellboy that has been built on and expanded on. Each character has their stats along the top. We've got fighting, shooting, investigating and defending, and the colour behind the icon represents which kind of dice you will roll when testing against those stats. There are special rules on this side. These are the always on special abilities that just activate when the time arises. And then over this side we have the unique actions which have a cost associated with them. Each hero will start the game with 3 action cubes, and when they activate in a turn they spend those cubes to do different things. They can do basic actions like moving, and then they also have these special abilities. Then down at the bottom here we have the health bar. Unlike Silver Tower, you aren't going to be putting dice in those spaces, but the game does have an interesting way of representing how the accumulation of damage over time will eventually result in you becoming less efficient in both fighting and investigating. And it's all done with these little damage tokens. As you take damage, you will place these on the spaces on your character sheet, and to begin with, that doesn't have any impact on your abilities. But eventually your health bar will completely fill up with damage tokens. From that point on, whenever you take damage, you flip the leftmost token on your damage tracker. And on the reverse of the tokens are different symbols which do have an impact on your abilities. This first one here means that whenever you make a shoot action, you will have to downgrade one of your shoot dice. This one means that when you refresh your pool of action cubes, you will have 1 less cube. This one means that when you test your fight, you will downgrade one of your fight dice, and so on. You can heal these afflictions, but every time you heal one, first of all you have to flip it back to a regular damage side, and then once you've removed all of these negative status effects, then you can start removing the actual damage tokens. It's a really interesting system, and although it is quite different, it does remind me a little bit of Warhammer Quest. Next up you get 7 punchboards. These are pretty thick and they contain all of your map tiles, your tokens, your Doom tracker board, and all of that sort of stuff. I'm not going to show you everything you get on these punch boards, but there are a few things that I wanted to mention specifically. You get 12 room tiles, and you can see that they have quite a minimalist design, but I do quite like that. Looking at how the game plays, it does look like things can get quite busy. You can get quite a lot of miniatures in a room, and then other tokens and things as well, so it does make sense to keep things a little bit simple in the design. And these are double-sided. And you get these little door tiles to link the rooms, and what I thought was cool about these is they are double-sided too. So when you're in the dungeons, you can use that side of the door, and when you're in a house, you can use the other side of the door. I know that probably doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but it's a little attention to detail that I do like. You also get furniture in this game, although it is only 2D tokens, but the furniture actually has a purpose as well. Ones with a yellow surround on them have special abilities, but they also have a size. The size will dictate things like how much other stuff can fit in that space on the board. But also, if you're being shot at, you can hide behind the furniture and the furniture will take damage equal to its size before you start taking damage. And there's also other cool things you can do, like Hellboy can pick up a piece of furniture and throw it, and then enemies will take damage equal to the size of the furniture plus the value of a dice roll. So yeah, destructible furniture that actually forms part of the strategy as you move around the board. It can help you defend yourself, it can be used as a weapon, you can throw people into them. That's neat. The game comes with 6 case files. These are your individual missions, and they are all sealed because they contain surprises. You're not supposed to know in advance what's going to happen, and as you play the games you'll flip these cards facing the new challenges as you go. Having those kinds of secrets built into your campaign, built into your individual missions, is good fun, but it does mean that sometimes the replayability can be lacking in a game. Once you have played through a case file, you know what surprises are coming, but it does say in the rules book that even if you do know what's coming up in these missions, you're still going to have variety in how the enemies are laid out, and things will play out differently based on the items you have available and your various successes and failures through your tests as you go. But at a £35 entry point for this game, I'm quite happy with fewer, more interesting missions than having many missions that all start to feel a little bit samey. You get 3 bags of tokens. You have health point trackers for the enemies, you have your action cubes for your heroes, and then you have a set of black cubes for tracking other statuses during the game. Next up, you get a deck of enemy cards. There is 1 card for each type of enemy that you will meet, which has all of their stats and any special abilities, and this deck also includes the various boss monsters like our giant frog monster, Rasputin's ghost, and the tentacles. As you are playing through a mission, there is a clock mechanism in the form of a doom track, and whenever the doom track advances, you will have to draw from the deck of doom to see what happens. One of the interesting things about the deck of doom, I'm not going to spoil the deck for you, but at the top of each card there is a symbol, and when you go on a particular case, it will tell you which cards to add to your doom deck, and also some of the cards have one of the agents, like this one has Hellboy here, and if you take a particular agent on a mission, you have to include their cards as well. So each time you're playing, you are facing a slightly different doom track, and different things will happen. Eventually you will face a boss, and when you do that, the bosses have a special behaviour deck, and again, much like with the doom track deck, there are symbols up in the corners of the cards, and depending on what type of boss you are facing, you will build a boss behaviour deck using specific symbols that are keyed to that particular monster, and that way your monsters won't do weird things they're not supposed to do. Having decks with icons like this is again something that reminds me of Silver Tower. When you used to set up Silver Tower missions, you had to add certain locations based on the mission that you were undertaking. And it does make setup for a mission take a little bit longer, but I do think the payoff is worth it because you get bosses that behave in unique ways, and then you get a doom track which is going to throw different challenges at you, and it means that you're not going to keep seeing the same things over and over again, and it helps to build a narrative into your adventure because it's possible to tailor the events that you encounter. We are nearly there, just a few small cards to go. This is the encounter deck. At the start of a mission, you'll place one of these face down in every room, and when you explore the room, you simply flip it over and it tells you what is in the room and whereabouts in the room it is. Once again, there are symbols in the bottom of the cards, and there's a good wedge of cards here, so it's going to be a constant mystery as to what you are going to be seeing next. There are 4 backup agents that you can take along with you on your missions, and these are represented on the board by tokens, but sometimes they're actually providing remote support. You can actually call them in as backup at certain points in the game. Finally, you get a wedge of starting cards for the 4 agents included in the game, and then a set of requisition cards, which you can normally draw from at the start of a mission to add some extra equipment to help you on your way. And there's something I wanted to talk about regarding the requisition cards, the item cards if you will, and they've done this really interesting thing where they've made many of them double-sided, and it provides extra layers of interest in how the items operate and how you can use them through your game. This is a stun grenade. It's a single-use item. It says discard after use. There's nothing on the back, so this is pretty much just a standard one-use item. However, some of them are like this incendiary ammo. It says spend an action cube to flip this card and tuck it under a weapon with the pistol icon that your agent is carrying. So you have to spend an action and then you effectively load your gun. You already have to have a gun, and then you can flip this ammo card. As it stands, this ammo card doesn't do anything when this side is showing, but once you flip it over, it says ammo loaded, and now this weapon causes fire damage and adds 1 to the result of shoot tests. So you have made your gun more powerful with special bullets, but you have to discard the card if the weapon runs out of ammo. And then sometimes you get items like the Mystic Sigil, and in this case you're getting an item which is a 2-use item, but its energy is depleted after the first use. It's a really interesting idea. So the game will start with the card face up like this, and it will say, after rolling a test, flip this card to turn any one die, either the effect die or a test die, to show a face of your choice. So you can take any one dice and make it the result you want it to be, but you have to then flip this card. When you flip the card, it changes to Magic's Fading, and now the item has a different ability. It says, after rolling a test, discard this card to re-roll any one die of your choice. So it's not as powerful as the first time where you got to pick the side, but it does give you another re-roll, and then after that it is discarded. And there are other examples of that in the deck, such as this Field Dressing, which can heal 2 damage, and then you flip the card, and then it says that the field dressings are depleted, and you can use it one more time, but this time you're only healing 1 damage. It's a very cool idea. So there we have it. That's a look at the contents of the Hellboy board game from Mantic Games, and just some of my initial thoughts looking at the various different mechanisms that the game provides. What do I think? Obviously I need to get the game to the table, I need to get some games under my belt before I can make any kind of judgment on the game itself, but just looking at mechanisms and just looking at components, this is a great little set. The miniatures are really nice, and everything seems to be of a decent quality. It definitely reminds me of Warhammer Quest in some regards, but it's definitely not just a reskinned Warhammer Quest. There are many, many, many differences. It's just something about certain things like the way that you accrue damage, the way that missions are set up, the way that there is a narrative and things are gradually revealed to you. It just feels like perhaps Silver Tower was the starting point for something that then went off in its own direction and did its own thing. Speaking of doing your own thing, one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about actions earlier is that when the agents are activating, they don't all have to take it in turn. You have action cubes for each agent, and you can mix up who does what when. For example, Hellboy might move, and then Liz might attack, and then Hellboy might make an attack, and then Johan will come forwards and do an investigation action. So you can mix it up, and that's going to be a big part of the strategy of the game. There also seems to be quite a bit of strategy baked into the dice mechanism, choosing when to boost other people's actions, when to boost your own actions, when to conserve actions for other reasons. Positioning on the board, there's a lot of things that will downgrade your dice. For example, being in the same space as other enemies. The frog spawns can downgrade your dice. So it seems like movement and positioning is going to play a big part as well. I really like the way that a lot of the equipment card can be flipped over and it does something different afterwards. And the 4 characters all look pretty interesting and unique. And I really love the idea of that health bar and how you take damage and how you can take a certain amount without any direct impact on your abilities, and then gradually you start taking random afflictions every time you take a hit. That's really neat. Will it all come together in the mix? Will it all end up being a fun game, or will it just be a big stodgy mess? That remains to be seen. At the moment, the 2 big downsides for me are there is a rather limited number of enemies in the box, and there are all these frog things. You're basically getting different varieties of frog person, and it may get old facing those same enemies over and over again, but of course there are many expansions available for the game so that you can add new monsters if you want to. And that's exactly what the Kickstarter that's running at the moment is all about: extra expansions, extra cases, extra enemies. The only other issue is whether it's going to be fiddly and time consuming setting up the decks before each game, but I think having just the base set in my possession, that's not going to be such a problem. I think once you start adding in lots of expansions and lots of extra cards, that could become quite tiresome to deal with. But for now, I think this game makes a very good first impression. I am happy with my purchase, and I'm looking forward to getting it to the table for some serious gameplay. And that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.